Hi, this is Jack Curran. I'm a black and white landscape photographer, and today I'm going to work on some botanicals for my YouTube channel. And I've had several requests for that. In particular, one very nice fellow has asked me a couple of times if I would take the time to demonstrate how I do my botanical series. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I really enjoy this series. It's one of these series where you really have to have vision of what you're trying to accomplish before you even take the picture, because when you walk into somewhere like like the Missouri Botanical Garden, or find a botanical that you're really interested in shooting, you really have to know the tools and the process for your post-processing, which helps with the final act of visualization. So I call the vision the art of seeing, and visualization is where I take the craft of using the post-processing tools and go through the process and really understand it before I take the picture. So it's kind of critical to put the two together to really bring your artistic realization of what you're trying to accomplish to life. So with that, you see I have three different botanicals up here on the screens, and real quickly I'm just going to do this, and I'm going to show you one. That's the way that one started. Here's the other one, and believe it or not, this is the way that one started. And then here's the last one, and this is the way that one started. So I think if I select them all, you'll understand what I mean by the visualization process and what you have to do in post-production to kind of get where you're trying to go. All right, so let's just go. I'm going to probably do these three. They don't take a lot of time. There's not a lot of Lightroom tools that you need to use. It's just a matter of using them eloquently to achieve your expressive image. So let me go ahead and share that with you. All right, here we go. Okay, we're back, and I'm going to try and share with you how I got from this image on the right to the image on the left, which is one of my favorite images. I actually shot this image on the right with 4x5 transparency film many years ago, and that pretty much started my whole experimentation with botanicals, whether they're in the field or whether they're in a location like the Missouri Botanical Garden, which is one of the nicest botanical gardens in the world. So let me go ahead and let's get started here, and I'll share with you. You'll see that there's nice flow from the image right here, and you'll see the flow going up and down, and you'll see the light kind of hitting the highlights on here, down here, a little bit in here. And so what I'm trying to do is look for the transitions in light. I'm going to pull that light down into a really tight radius so that I have a very dramatic effect. But let's go ahead and open up the tool palettes. I'm going to go into the develop module here. I'm going to go ahead and close some of the collections real quick. And if you look at the histogram here, you'll see that it goes all the way to the upper right with very little in the way of on the right side and a little bit on the left. So I'm going to go ahead and turn those off for a second because they can be a little distracting. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and convert that to black and white, and you can see that it's very flat. So there's not a lot of characteristic drama and high contrast compared to what I normally do. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share with you, you guys have seen me probably do this exercise before, but I'm going to bump my highlights out. I'm going to take my blacks all the way down and my exposure down, because I want to see where the highlights are holding in here. And you can see the highlights are holding on this one leaf coming down, the side of this leaf over here on this bottom leaf, and a little bit along this edge on the left leaf that's kind of angling down. And so those are the three primary areas that I'm going to be looking for to kind of give me my focus and interest, because I really like the way they intersect in the middle there and kind of create this triangle. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let me just kind of check what happens when I do this. I'm going to look at when I blow the whites out. I'm going to take the shadows really far down. I'm going to take my exposure down, and you can see what happens is how contrasty it can get. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of take some of these back. I'm going to reset the whole thing. I'll go to black and white again. And now I am going to add a little contrast. I am going to pull my exposure down. I will bring that highlight in the middle up, but by underexposing right here, you can see that everything's kind of moving down to the other end of the spectrum here. I'm going to add a little clarity just to start. Now, I'm going to take a big radial filter here, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to click the invert button, which is going to reverse it. And then you'll see I'm going to pull it down quite a bit. You can still see a little detail kind of down here around the sides. Now I'm going to take another one. I'm going to double click effect. I'm going to reset that. And now I'm in the middle. So now I've just opened up this area right in here. And I want to take the highlights down just a little because I'm going to go back and add some clarity and a little texture in there. And texture is that new tool that just came out in the latest version. And I really love that. And then I might open up the shadows. Nah, I'm not going to open up the shadows. I do see a couple little things that I'm going to go ahead and take the adjustment brush. I'm going to take the exposure down, highlights down, whites down, and just knock down a couple things that are just kind of in the background here. Just kind of a little distracting. And I actually could probably use the clone brush a little quicker. And just knock some of those things down real quick. All right. So again, I'm not going to take this to a master print file. Now I'm going to take the adjustment brush, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go up. Let me double click and reset that. And I'm going to go up the side of this here. I'm going to make it a little bigger. I'm going to come up the side right there. I'm going to start bringing that detail out a little bit. I'm going to make it smaller. And just, whoopsie. Kind of move that all the way off the page there. So I'm going to go back and redo that. Right in there. And just kind of paint that one back in. And I'm going to add a little clarity in there too, because that'll pump the contrast and a little texture in there. All right, now I'm going to close that. I'm going to go over here to another radius. I'm going to invert it. I'm going to double click effect first, then I'm going to hit the invert. And now I'm going to leave this open for a minute because I'm going to go in and just pop this center. And you can already see that I'm getting quite a bit of detail in here. There's a little bit too much detail on this leaf right here, so I've gone to the adjustment brush. I'm going to take my exposure down and my highlights, and I just want to kind of take that one back a little, just a little, and I'm going to take this, I'm going to put that down there in the black a little bit. I just want to kind of knock that out. So I'm moving it around, picking up some black, and just kind of knocking that out. I'll go back and get the details of that a little bit later. Let's just quickly take a look in our library and see what the two look like together. And you can see the one on, I don't know, the one on the right, the one on the right is the new one. The one on the left is the old one, and that was really 2 or 3 moves to get me to where I wanted to be, right? And I could go back and I could hit a little bit more contrast on that or do whatever and just kind of clean some things up. But that was a really quick example of how when I walk into the Missouri Botanical Garden or any garden or even out in the field and I'm shooting plants or botanicals, I look for the very essence of the highlights and the shadows and how I can go in and create this whole this whole look and feel that goes with the series that I've created. And if you go to my website, you'll see kind of the series that's there. But so that's a good look at one. Let me share with you another one now. So this one is even a little bit more confusing when you first look at it because I had to get from here to here, and you'll see that I have this one on the left is really this area right in here. Let me go into develop real quick and share with you kind of what I was looking at. I really didn't have my long lens with me, so I was kind of looking at the intersection of these leaves right here, these palms, and trying to figure out how I could get this to tell more of a story. So that's kind of where I ended up with this. I'm going to give it a little bit more room to breathe and go ahead and share with you how I did that. So now I'm just going to go back real quick. I'm going to go into the library. I'm going to use the compare, and you can kind of see the two right here. It looks like I cropped a little closer when I was finally, in it. I took a little bit more off the top. So I'll go back and add a little more to the bottom and a little less off the or a little more on the top. So let me do this, develop, go back to the crop tool right here, and I'm looking for these two right here and kind of the bottom end of that, and I'm just going to square it up, kind of center it, square it a little. Okay, so there's where we are right now, and you can see these highlights are just on the ends. It's really kind of hard to see, or the tips here on the ones coming from underneath that are kind of intersecting here, but you have these really nice highlights on the ones on the right because it's a lighter green. So I'm going to do a quick black and white conversion. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a little contrast. I'm going to take my exposure way down. I'm going to take my highlights way up and my whites because I want to see what can happen here. And then if I take my blacks down and my exposure down, you can start seeing where the tips are popping and the highlights on the front plant where it's the lighter green are really starting to pick up the light. Now I can go in and I can do more with my my mixing tools on the mixing bar to get them a little less contrasty, as far as having a little bit more dynamic range or tonal range in the light. Okay, so I'm just going to go reset that real quick. I'm going to do my black and white conversion. I'm going to go back. I'm going to do my crop real quick. I think I was somewhere in here. And I need those bottom ones. So that should be a little closer, 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 a little more off the top. Good enough for now. So now I've got a really flat black and white. So I am going to take my exposure down. I'm going to add contrast. You can see the highlights starting to come up there. I'm going to raise my white up a little and my highlights, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to take my green and kind of smooth that out. Now I've got enough detail in the center here. I'm going to go in with my radial, and it's a very vertical radial that you'll see here. I'm going to double click effect. I'm going to click the invert, and then I'm going to start pulling it down. And you can see I'm already getting to that kind of little bit of a magical place. I think I'm just a little tight, so I'm going to give it a little breathing room here. Now I'm going to go back and real quickly I want to just kind of look at the overall, and I'm going to take the highlights up a little. I'm going to take the clarity up, and that gives me a little bit more contrast in there. I want to see what the texture tool does. Just a little bit of texture in there. This two little prongs coming down here and some of the texture back here are just a little distracting for me. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to give it a little bit more room. I just want it to be in this black space kind of floating, and which means I'm going to have to go back and just kind of, now I've got this brush and I've got my highlights taken down pretty far. I'm going to go back and just brush out some of this just real quick. Just a little bit of detail in here that I'm going to knock down. I'm going to go back and get a new one. I'm going to double click effect. I take the exposure down, the highlight down again, and I just want to go in and just kind of get these right here. I could also clone those out, but I want a little bit of detail in there. Okay, so let's go back and see. I really like what's going on in the middle here, so I'm going to go back. I'm going to hit one more. Double click effect, invert again, and I just want to go a little darker. A little darker. I'm going to feather that a little bit more, and then I'm going to make it a little wider. And I'm going to close that. I've got too much going on down here that's light. I'm going to just kind of knock some of that down. Okay, I'm going to tighten that brush up a little and go down here. It might have been a little too much, but you know, you can kind of get the idea of how that's fitting in there now. Now, one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back with a brush, go back with a brush, double click effect, take my highlights up, or my exposure up and my highlights up just a little, and then I'm just going to kind of come back in and get some of this right here so that it has a little bit more brightness to it overall. I'm going to hit back in here a little so you can see the intersection. I'm going to reduce the size of my brush a little, try and smooth that out and bring that out. Whoopsie, let's see if I got that in the right spot. Yep. Now let me go in here and just paint just a little bit more. This one a little brighter. New brush. Double click effect, exposure, shadow, and give me a little more exposure. And I just want to bring a little bit of this out right here. I could have overdone that a little bit before. I just don't know. It needs something so that it can have a sense of what it's kind of holding on to. I like the leaves, I don't like the stalk. So I'm going to go back with another new one. This time I'm going to go back, double click effect. I'm going to take the exposure down and the shadow down and the highlights way down, and I'm just going to try and just paint that down just a little right there. So it's just the leaves kind of coming through there. Okay, so let's go back to the library, look at these two side by side. You know, they're a little bit different. I've got a little bit more, I appear to be a little closer here in this one, maybe a little contrast here. I've got a couple different things, but you can see generally overall that I've gone in and I've done this one very quickly too with very limited number of tools, but having a vision for what I want to do in the series makes all the difference in the world. Okay, let's share one more real quick. And this one is the palms, and I'll go ahead and share with you real quickly. Here is the palm that we're actually looking at, and you can see that is really just the left side of this image. I really enjoyed, there's a soft light that is going down the side of the image here. And for me, that's a very elegant little light, and then it's backlit on the edge here. So you can just barely see the backlit edge. So it's got the volume from light coming from both sides. And then there's some nice little details down here in the texture of the palm. And again, when I was shooting this one, I was shooting straight up into the sky. And these were backlit from the geodesic dome that's over the plants in this particular building. So it was kind of a top side lighting. All right, let's go in here. Let's go in and go ahead and go into the develop module, and I'm going to go ahead and crop this as best as I can remember. One of the things that I like to look for when I'm cropping is, you know, making sure that I have it going out this edge of the frame and this edge of the frame, and that there's balance on this side and this side. So you'll notice that there's balance here and balance here, and it's not going into the corner, which would be kind of a weird tangent and stuff like that. So let me go ahead and do a black and white conversion. I'm going to pull it way down. I'm going to pump the highlights way up and the whites way up. Oh, that's way up. But now you can start seeing the glow on the center of the palm right here, and you can see the other side carrying a little bit of light that's balanced or probably reflected off of something down there below it. Now when I look at texture, that looks good. If I look at clarity, you can see the intensity of what's going on, because that's moving my mid-range and really dropping the density on some areas. If I look at, you know, different things like, you know, there's a real high dehaze there, but I'm not sure that I'm going to go there. I just want to go ahead and take a peek. So real quick, the crop here and here with balance, maybe up a little, double click, black and white, take my exposure down, my highlights up a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and create a radial again. And this whole series is really about radials. I'm going to go a little wider on that. I'm going to double click effect. I'm going to invert, and then I'm going to take everything really dark. And you can already see the effect of what's going on. Now I'm going to go ahead and take that radial and stretch it a little bit more. And then I might even take and create a new one and overlap it. Double click effect, invert. Actually, I need to open it up and click that invert button, because now I'm going to go back and highlight kind of that bottom section. I'm going to move it down, spread it a little. Now I will take one more. I'm going to put it right over the center here. It's probably a little too long, but I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to double click effect. And now I'm going to open this one up, and I'm going to open the shadows, and I'm going to add clarity to it. So now you can see that really starting to come to life in there. I think that's a little too long. I don't want it to go too far up and out. I'm going to spread it just a little. And I'm going to move it a little to the right, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to move this one a little to the right, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to shorten it, and I'm going to go back and get the rest of this shaft in a minute, but I want to go ahead and have this just more to the right side and in the center right here, so it's got some balance on the other side, a little bit up there. Okay, I'm going to close these real quick, and I want to look at clarity. I'm going to bring my exposure up just a little. I've got some kind of weird, you know, highlights coming from the texture up here that's going to be a little distracting down here, and of course a little distracting up here in the corner. So I can knock that out real quick. You'll notice that the exposure was down 1.6, the highlights were down, the shadows were down, and that just kind of knocked that out very quickly. Excuse me, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to double click the effect and reset this, and I'm going to come up here. I'm going to turn that to the side here, stretch it a little, and then move it back up here. And then I'm going to take the exposure down up there just a little, and you can see that disappearing, but in a nice soft radial way. I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to turn this, and I want clarity, I want some texture. I just want to peek at dehaze and see if that doesn't knock it down a little too much. And then I'm going to take one right here, and I'm not going to put it on the shaft a little as much, the shaft of the plant, as I am looking for just a little bit of contrast and highlights in this right edge. Now I'm just pumping the white a little bit, and then clarity again. And you'll notice I build and I use layers, and I build in slowly when I do some of this stuff. I'm going to do one more new, well, I'm going to use a adjustment brush here. I'm going to take the exposure down, the highlight down, and I'm just going to kind of paint through here a little, just to kind of round out that edge. Then I'm going to put one more new one in here. I'm going to double click effect. Now this time I'm just going to go for highlights and whites, and I'm just going to try and paint a little down this shaft right here. Can't see much moving there, but there's a little bit going on. Now one way I can make that move a lot is to now take the exposure, except I really need to do that with two different brushes. I'm going to open this up a little too. It looks a little unnatural there, so a little bit more. Okay, now one more new brush. Not so much the shadow. Kind of going down the left side too. And that's giving me a little bit of the glow in there. I feel like I've lost a little something up here where it needs the plant just to kind of hold it together a little bit. All right, so let's go to the library real quick, compare these two. Let's see. Here we go. They're quite a bit different. This one has some nice kind of texture going on here. This one's a little bit different. But having done that real quickly, you know, you could go back, and what I'll do is I'll look at it. You know, I would go leave an image like this and come back later and go in and try and refine it for a final print, for a master print file. But I actually like the way this is kind of flaring out here. It feels like it's giving it a little bit more turn and volume. So I would probably go back and take a look at this again. So, and I do like the way the top's fading to black here and fading to black a little bit down here. Might like this a little better. So anyway, there you have it. There's 3 different botanicals. You can see that they're very simple. There's an adjustment brush, and there's radial tools here. There's controlling contrast, clarity, a little bit of dehaze, a little bit of texture, using your highlight slider and your exposure and your shadows in black to try and figure out where the highlights and shadows are. And that'll get you there. It's really about having the vision while you're shooting to kind of get to the final, you know, final print and what you're trying to hang on the wall or what kind of series you're trying to create. So, okay, have a great day, and thanks for visiting the YouTube channel.